This is Kim Hammer with your devotion taken from 2 Samuel chapter 5, beginning with verse 17, going to the end of the chapter. The Philistines had heard that David had been anointed king over all of Israel, not just Judah, not just Israel, but all of Israel, united as one nation now. And they gathered themselves together to come up against David and against the nation of Israel, but as had been their experience before, but this time to the greater severity, they were going to be struck down. And the question is, why was it that they were struck down in such a mighty way as we see in chapter 5? Well, here are some things that we can put into application in our life whenever it is that the enemy thinks about coming against us. We too can experience the victory like David and the Israelites did if we just learn from the pattern that's given to us in these verses. The first thing is we need to recognize in verse 17 that the enemy always comes in full force. Whenever it is that the enemy wants to wage war against you or I as God's children, they're going to come against us in full force. Satan doesn't do anything halfway. He might be sly, he might be cunning, he might be in a position where he wants to maneuver himself in, just like a lion seeking to destroy the prey, but he will come in full force. And that's one thing we need to understand as God's children. Never think that Satan is coming after you with just a partial force. Always live as though he's coming after you with the full force. That way you'll be fully reliant upon the Lord. The second thing is, David was listening for what the enemy had to say. If you want to defeat the enemy, you have to be listening to what they want to say. You may not like what you're going to hear. You may not want to subject yourself to have to hear what they've got to say. But the reality is, one of the things that made David a winner was that he was listening to what the enemy was saying. The third thing out of verse 17 is this: you've got to inquire of the Lord. On two occasions in these verses, David inquired of the Lord before he went against the battle of the Philistines. And as a result of putting God ahead of him by listening to what he had to say, David did not experience defeat, but he experienced victory. Maybe we would experience more victories over our enemy, the Satan, if we would do more listening to God and consulting with God first instead of just going in on our own. When you get down to verse 20, it said that the Lord will break out on the enemy if we ask him first. And that's one experience we want to have. We want to have the Lord break out on our enemy. We want to have him ultimately turned loose on our enemy. But again, we've got to follow the pattern that David followed in these verses if we want to have a breakout experience over our enemy. When you take a look at verse 22, sometimes the enemy never learns. The Philistines have been defeated once, but now they were regrouping to come back. Don't ever think that the enemy is going to give up on you. Don't think that Satan is ever going to give up on you. In fact, I think one of the strategies of Satan is that if he can get you to relax to where you don't think he's going to come against you in full force, that is exactly when he is going to get you. Also, we need to realize that as we inquire of the Lord each time, we need to do like David did and ask for specific instructions as to how he wants us to handle the matter. And then notice also in verse 22 that God will always send help. If you ask God for help, he's going to help you. Can't tell you in what manner, what form, what fashion he's going to help you, but I can tell you that every time that David asked for God's help, God delivered on giving him help. And the last thing is this: if you do as the Lord commands, he will give you victory, but it has to start in going to your stronghold. If you go back to the very first part of these verses, 17 and 18, you find that one thing David did when he realized the enemy was trying to come against him, the Bible says he went down to his stronghold. If we make God our stronghold, then there's no enemy that can defeat us, because no enemy of God can defeat God. And if we stay safe within the stronghold of the Lord, then we will win the victory. You've got to find your strength and your stronghold in the Lord.